we're launching today our series on the battle for the Constitution, and I was very proud of that title until the launch essay by Jeff informed me that this is actually the fourth battle for the Constitution, which is a little less sizzle than I'd hoped. I thought we were going to do this for the first time. So, sorry about that. I think is the mic working now? Can you hear me in the back? Let's try this one more time. Excellent.
Wonderful.
So this morning we launched our series on the battle for the Constitution, and I had thought that this was a great original title, but Jeff tells me this is the fourth battle for the Constitution, so we're just repeating history here. Can you, and this is like an exam for the director of the National Constitution Center, can you in 90 seconds walk us through the previous three battles for the Constitution? The 200 years of constitutional history, you can do this.
The 90-second test is good, and we're going to start now. So the first battle is over the ratification of the Constitution itself. And the question is how to balance the power of the big states and small states and create a union large enough to achieve common purposes, but constrained enough to protect people from tyranny. And the main fear is mob rule, and the result is a system that slows down deliberation, but does not settle the fatal stain of slavery. The second battle is an effort to efface that stain. It begins with the Civil War fighting as a fight for the Union and the question of who is sovereign, the people of the United States as a whole or the people of the states, and then it shifts to one over the new birth of freedom declared at Gettysburg and culminates in the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which extend the promise of equality to African Americans. But those amendments, as Martha Jones said so well, were thwarted by the Supreme Court and by the terror of Southern redemption, and it would take the Civil Rights Movement to make their promise a possibility. The third battle is fought in 1936 and 1937. The Supreme Court is striking down the New Deal regulatory state as exceeding the originalist Constitution and its limited powers. Roosevelt threatens to pack the court retreats and upholds the New Deal, and ever since then embraces a broad vision of federal power to regulate the economy. Is that the end of the 90 seconds, or can I do the fourth battle? That was it.
We've got to pause here.
Yeah, there we go.
And
That's the
I'm going to applaud that because that was a heck of a summary. And that'll take us into the fourth battle, which is where we are today. How would you define this fourth struggle and stack it up against those earlier ones?
The fourth battle is fought over whether to revive the originalist Constitution and repeal the post-New Deal administrative state. Ever since the 1940s, conservatives of many stripes, libertarians, evangelicals, Catholics, natural law theorists, have been convinced that the Supreme Court betrayed the original Constitution when it blessed the delegation of congressional authority to the administrative agencies and allowed the president to make laws and rules without congressional oversight. And in 1980, President Reagan promised to appoint originalist justices who would essentially repeal that understanding. He nominated Robert Bork in 1987. If Bork had been confirmed, the fourth battle would have been resolved and the originalist Constitution would have had 5 votes on the Supreme Court and our understanding of federal power would have been transformed. But Bork was not confirmed. We've had an uneasy truce of 30 years when Anthony Kennedy was the swing vote on the Supreme Court. Now he's been replaced by Justice Kavanaugh. Chief Justice Roberts is in the uneasy center of a court barely in equipoise. Speaking descriptively, as the nonpartisan head of the National Constitution Center, I can say that the election of 2020 may well determine the fourth battle's resolution. If President Trump is reelected and replaces a liberal justice with a conservative one, there'll be 6 votes, if not 5.5, to resurrect the originalist Constitution and meaningfully to restrict the scope of federal power. If he loses and a Democrat wins, the balance may continue, and yet we could see extraordinary forms of constitutional conflict ranging from court packing, which many of the Democratic presidents have endorsed, to a refusal by a Republican Senate to confirm any nominee by a Democratic president.
So let me cut you off there because you're pointing to something interesting. Much of that history was devoted to the fight among constitutional conservatives to restore the original meaning of the Constitution as they understand it. But it turned there at the end. If you go back and look at polls in 2016, Somewhere between, depending on the poll, 1.25% of Trump voters said that getting good constitutional conservative judges onto the courts was decisive in their support. Nothing like those numbers on the Democratic side of the aisle. But you're pointing out that that is changing in the run-up to 2020. Now, really, for the first time in a long time, we're hearing progressive candidates center the courts in their campaign pitches, talk about their plans for reform, articulate judicial visions. Is that an extension of the fourth battle, or are we seeing sort of the birth of a fifth?
No, it's the fourth, because the question is who gets to control the meaning of the Constitution. And ever since Roosevelt, the president has controlled the meaning of constitutional change through transformative Supreme Court appointments. And Democrats were very, very slow to wake up to this fact. It was remarkable that election after election passed with people warning, focusing just on Roe v. Wade. Well, Roe v. Wade is just one case. What we're talking about is the very nature of federal authority and individual rights. And the reason Democrats finally woke up is partly because of frustration over the Garland nomination, which they consider a stolen seat, and then frustration over the Kavanaugh nomination, and a sense that the court itself may not be legitimate, that it may be politicized, that it doesn't deserve respect. And that's why you see formally moderate, I see heads nodding, formally moderate Democrats saying, if the Republicans are going to play constitutional hardball, so are we, and we will take back our stolen seats and pack the court. It is the fourth battle, because now Democrats understand that it's not just a few decisions that are at stake, but the very meaning of the Constitution. And that's why that discussion of constitutional crisis was so interesting. The New Deal conflict was an averted crisis. It was looking like a crisis when Roosevelt promised to pack the court, but because the Supreme Court stepped back, the crisis was averted. If this conflict culminates in court packing, it would be both a transformative constitutional moment and a crisis. And given the fact that we are more polarized than at any time since the end of the Civil War, according to the extraordinary statistics of Norbert McCarthy, I think it's fair to place this conflict in the context of the Revolutionary Era, the Civil War, and the New Deal.
So, in some sense, that's comforting to me, because I can look back at earlier crises and realize that things aren't so bad right now. There is not, in fact, open fighting in the streets of Washington. On the other hand, it's a little bit unnerving, because you're pointing us back to moments. Shays' Rebellion happened around that first crisis. You had the Civil War and the thousands slaughtered during redemption in the South during the second crisis. The third crisis also saw violence in the 1930s. These have not been moments of social order and respect for process. These have been moments that have tested the fabric of democracy. Are you concerned that as we accelerate into this fourth battle, we could be back in a place like that?
It's very important that you note the centrality of violence in the previous eras. The Constitution Center just opened this very moving exhibit on the constitutional legacy of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and it has Thaddeus Stevens's cane. Stevens proposed the 13th Amendment, and it's like the one that was used to cane Charles Sumner on the floor of the Senate. And Joanne Freeman has this amazing book reminding us that during that era, people would run for Congress on the platform, I have a better right hook than the other guy. I'm going to beat up my opponent. I'm going to cane him and crush him and kill him on the floor of the Senate. That's how violent things were then. And we're not.
There's this great scene in that book where a representative is denouncing slavery, and a Southern representative stands up and cocks his pistol and levels it at him, whereupon he's joined by two other gun-toting congressmen, and then there's two other gun-toting congressmen on the other side. You've got something like the gunfight at the OK Corral unfolding on the floor of the U.S. House. I find moments like that illuminating, because they show us that the battle for constitutional control and meaning, which is what that was a fight over, has often been a literal battle and not just the metaphor that we're employing right now.
Well, that raises the question, and we didn't resolve it on the last panel. Even would court packing in the future actually be a crisis? According to the Keith Whittington definition that Quinta mentioned, it wouldn't. It would take the president saying, I'm not going to obey the law, open violence, or literally the branches not being able to function. So it would be more likely to be a crisis if Republicans refuse to confirm any Democratic nominees. The court can function with 8 justices, as we saw when Justice Scalia died. There were more unanimous opinions because they didn't want to have ties that would reaffirm the lower court. But if more justices leave the court and the court shrinks to 7 or something like that, and more significantly, if the court is so delegitimized that people don't obey its commands, both citizens protesting and refusing to obey its command, or the president threatening to do so, a Democratic president refusing to obey the commands of a conservative court that strikes down climate change regulation under the anti-delegation doctrine of the Green New Deal, I think that would be a crisis, even though it didn't contain violence. But history does suggest we should set a high bar.
If we're not scaring you, we're not doing this right.
That's the goal of the website. But
one interesting academic study that I saw about 6 months ago used an algorithm to try to sort, just based on the language they were using, statements about the Constitution by Democratic and Republican congressmen. And 40 years ago, it couldn't do it. And today, it has better than 95% accuracy. You can throw the words in, and just based on the language they're using to talk about the Constitution, without any analysis of the meaning of those words, the algorithm can tell which side of the aisle they're on. So I think that one of the things we're trying to do with this project is to rebuild some kind of common vocabulary. I'd like to break that algorithm. I'd like to make it so that as members of the Congress and members of the public discuss the Constitution, I don't pretend that they're going to agree, but at least they're using the same words. And I think that kind of vocabulary has shrunk a little bit, that kind of shared understanding.
that is beautifully put. And when I said our goal is to scare people, it's the opposite. It's just what you said. How meaningful in this polarized time to provide a platform for citizens of different perspectives to disagree without being disagreeable, thoughtfully to air their serious disagreements, but to do so not in political but constitutional terms. There's nothing like it on any media site in the United States. And now there is. It's what the Constitution Center tries to do every day with our educational materials, with our podcasts, with our videos for high school kids, with these thrilling new constitutional exchanges that unite students in classrooms across the country for discussions about the Constitution moderated by judges and master teachers. But it's premised on this act of faith that all of you citizens, and that citizens of all ages, have the capacity to distinguish between their political from their constitutional views, to think like constitutional lawyers and Supreme Court justices, and to reach conclusions about the Constitution that might clash with their policy preferences. Yoni is a deep scholar of these issues. He knows the substance, and he completely shares my belief that our common project may not just illuminate the issues in the news, but could actually elevate civil discourse in America, which is why I'm so thrilled about our joint enterprise.
The fact that you're all here tonight gives me great confidence that there is an audience for this kind of work, and I hope that you'll all be reading along in the months to come. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.